And we're live.
Welcome back. It's our fifth and final session of the 50th Annual Virtual BOC. I'd like to welcome back Dr. Micah Weinberg, who will again serve as moderator for our Government, Nonprofit, and Education panel. The experts on this panel will discuss how economic recovery after COVID-19 will impact their respective sectors and the workforce that will forever be changed long after this pandemic ends. With that, Dr. Weinberg, the floor is yours.
Great. Hey, howdy, strangers.
Howdy.
It's been it's been a few minutes, but we've got another great panel for you. And here, in the last panel we were talking about employers, large, small, staffing companies, and now we've got a great group of nonprofits, academics, and public sector to talk about economic recovery from their perspective. So our wonderful panel today includes Dr. Elaine Farndale. She's the Professor of Human Resources Management and the Associate Director of the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the Penn State University. So thanks for coming all the way over here to California. And we have as well Michael Powers, who is the County Executive Officer of Ventura County. And last and absolutely not least, my good friend, Jeffrey Wallace, who is the President and CEO of Leaders Up, a really innovative workforce development intermediary. He'll be telling you a little bit more about their work. And actually, Jeffrey, I'm going to start with you. So we discussed this from the employer perspective of the last panel, but sadly, tools like the California Dream Index and many other analyses show that this economic downturn has actually widened the inequities that were already bad in our state on race, gender, region, economic inequities. So what can we do? Like, you're so good at issuing these calls to action, right? For everybody in the audience here, what can we do to ensure that this recovery is equitable? And how does Leaders Up help employers and others with that?
Well, thanks for the question, Micah, and I want to thank the County of Ventura, the larger conveners of this event, for this opportunity. To your point, right, Micah, the pandemic really pulled back the covers on some of a lot of the existing systemic barriers tied to systemic racism that a lot of people of color and marginalized communities have demonstrated for years. But of course, this crisis that we're in has significantly intensified that, particularly in the area as we think about employment, education, as well as compensation and benefits. And when we think about what the private sector and employment sector at large can do is, as we start to move from relief into recovery, really pay attention to how these recovery efforts are actually targeted and impacting young people of color in large marginalized communities of color. And Leaders Up as an intermediary to help businesses bridge the divide between the untapped potential of these populations and the business challenge of finding and keeping the right talent. But in order to, I think, really ignite an inclusive recovery to COVID-19, we're going to have to reimagine how, as employers, recruit diverse talent, retain diverse talent, and advance that diverse talent. In a culture, number one, that's inclusive, one that's psychologically safe, but also one that really is focused on being anti-racist. And what I mean by anti-racist is really ensuring that there is an intentional focus on eradicating racist policies, practices, and people management strategies that produce desperate outcomes across, again, the systemic drivers of education, employment, and compensation. And this is not just from a moral perspective that businesses should be doing this at the height of a lot of civil unrest connected to, racial justice in the country, as well as the desperate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. But this is also for businesses to be more profitable and competitive. When we look at the shifting demographics across the nation, and even in LA and the Southern California area, we understand that the nation is browning before our eyes, and from a standpoint of race, there are a lot more young people of color that are entering into the workforce. So that means diversity, equity, inclusion strategies around education, ensuring that employers are able to communicate what the future of work in their business from a competency and skills perspective is a tremendous opportunity for the county of Ventura, specifically when you think about close to 32% of the young people under the 32% of the population of Ventura County being young people under the age of 21. That's a huge segment of the population that needs to be educated in alignment with the future of work. And Leaders Up helps employers do that. I'll yield the floor, Michael, because I know we have a finite amount of time, but happy to chime in on other areas and how Leaders Up can support employers in advancing an inclusive recovery.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. But what I'm hearing from you is really that this is the growth model, right? You can't grow without engaging the young folks in Ventura County. You can't grow without engaging the people that will increasingly be a larger percentage of the demographics. So this is not like a charitable exercise. This is not an altruistic exercise. This is essential to make sure that we have a strong economic recovery and a strong economy generally.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the growth model. The superior growth model is infusing equity into your business practices. One, to capitalize on the increased market share of multicultural talent. Two, to ensure that you have the performance necessary to be competitive in a multicultural economy. And I think most importantly, three, to ensure that consumers now associate your brand with being an organization or enterprise strategy that advances racial equity. Millennials and Gen Z, an increasing contributor to our economy, locally and nationally, they vote with their pocketbooks and they align with brands that are advancing racial equity in 2021 moving forward.
Great. So, Michael, I mean, thinking, we'll talk a little bit about public policies, but, thinking for a moment as the county as an employer, how do you think about, these issues and what are some of the steps that you've taken here in Ventura County?
Well, very much in line with what Jeffrey's saying. And first of all, thank you to Michelle and Tracy and Visita for hosting this conference. Seems to be just exactly what we should be talking about. But yes, embracing diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do, but it's also right from an organizational standpoint. It improves retention and recruitment efforts, employee morale, and the design and delivery of products and services. It just, all the studies show that. So it's just a real difference maker for us, but it all comes down to culture, right? And how do you establish that culture and have it just be more than just nice words? And so in 2017, we developed, with our board support, a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force, with the idea that diversity doesn't happen from the top down. I can't tell people to be more, it happens from the employees telling leadership, this is what we see and what we ought to do, and to have real and often uncomfortable conversations. We want to know really what you think, what's going on, what are the problems? Let's be real, let's create a safe environment where people can talk about it. And then it comes down to our employees do reflect the diversity of our community in general, yes, but in our leadership ranks, not as much. So our task force told us we need a mentorship program and broader outreach, and we've done that, and that has helped with our leadership promotions and hiring become more diverse. And that's important because we're also infusing it into our strategic plan because we want it to be in our DNA. Not just something else that we do after we're done, but part of everything that we do in our operations. And as I say, it helps internally, but then we turn externally. And as we look at our community to make sure that we're supporting our local businesses and workforce in meaningful ways that address their cultural issues. And our board developed a farm worker resource program to support our local farm workers and our wonderful local farmers and growers. And that has been this was before the pandemic, that's been huge in helping us reach out to the ag community. Our business assistance program, the board identified that, we did about 20 million in our partners with the Community Foundation, EDC, and WEAVE, 20 million in business assistance grants, and 40, they prioritize minority and women-owned businesses. And that was so important. So you have to be very intentional about it, and you have to measure it. You have to measure it with data. And then,
that's great.
And rental assistance programs as well, getting that out there. And then just the overall connection to the community, because you can have these great programs, but if our communities of color and low-income communities aren't aware of them, then that doesn't work. And so one of the things that we've worked hard through social media, but also just boots on the ground, community engagements with churches and schools and our community partners, really getting out there to make these businesses aware of these supports that are available to them. And then things like the digital divide, broadband. I know we'll talk about that more going forward, but really bringing broadband to low-income areas so that they have that access to the greater resources.
Yeah, it's really an all the above strategy. And so, Dr. Farndale, I want to bring you into this conversation. from your perspective as an expert on human resources, education and workforce development here and internationally, how do you think about these issues and how, so many of these young folks are students? And so how do you think about their experience as employees and students and what we need to do to promote a robust and equitable economic recovery?
And thanks, Micah, and thanks very much for having me. And I think just the fact that I'm on the East Coast and having this conversation as part of Ventura County today is just part of this whole idea that we can't think in kind of siloed ways anymore. And the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion that we've been talking about also happens on so many different levels. So when we start thinking about education, this isn't just about just thinking in a very local sense. Education is increasingly growing into multiple platforms. So all that's happened basically through the COVID-19 pandemic is we've accelerated our thinking about how education can take place. There's been a kind of a speed up, I think, of the erosion of your standard 4-year residential, degree course where, you go off to college for 4 years, you come back a different person and you enter the workforce. For me, the growth is going to happen. The economic growth is going to happen. The stronger that we can get the connection between industry and education. So that means company partners talking with professors, with instructors at education institutions, from my perspective as a professor, to understand better what organizations need, and from the student's perspective, to be able to get some connections with people who are potential employers in the future. So if we can kind of bundle this together as education not being about I'll go off to college for 4 years, then I'm going to go into a career. But rather, education is just it's a rolling stone, and you're gathering more information. But in the process, you're making connections to organizations. Organizations are feeding into that curriculum. But also the actual mode of delivery of the education. Again, the pandemic has speeded us up into this situation where we're all little boxes on a screen, and we're having to teach our students this way. But we did some surveys of our students at Penn State, and the overwhelming response after the first kind of 1.5, 2 semesters of being online was, we desperately want to get back in person, but we want to get back in person for the social things. We actually quite like this education online piece. So some combination of being in person and online is the way forward. So that's why I'm kind of saying you've got to kind of bundle and maybe customize things for individuals, so that you're getting the connection with organizations and education coming together, and you're getting some kind of mix of in-person and online activities.
Yeah, so this is coming up again and again and again. We weren't doing it the right way before this happened. And so to the extent that we were forced to become more flexible, forced to become more person-centered, we are actually doing things we should carry forward into the future. And, we also got a question from the audience in terms of, public-private partnerships and what the role is for the public sector working with the employers to ensure that the recovery is fast and is equitable. So, Jeffrey, I want to get to you on that. How do you think about these kinds of partnerships between nonprofits, educational institutions, and the private sector?
Well, to Dr. Farndale's point, it's essential. The cross-sector collaboration to solve some of these big issues that will help us maintain global competitiveness is really anchored in ensuring that, one, again, to Dr. Farndale's point, that employers are able to articulate down to the skills and competencies that they need for different roles and positions. Because one, that will enable the education system to then align their course offerings and training in alignment with what actually the market needs. And the more that we can get that down to specifics at the regional level, like at the county level, so that the education system, whether it be career and technical education or more professional education, or even K through 12 can be aligned. So signaling across just what we need is one way that you can forge public-private partnerships. Intermediaries like Leaders Up, we work with community colleges in order to bolt on their training and development capacity into the learning and development infrastructure of small through large size businesses. A lot of businesses think that they have to come up with these training programs on their own and deploy them, and public-private partnerships allow you to leverage the capacity of another sector to drive the type of business performance outcomes you want to see through the ongoing learning and development. But it's key that businesses look at their learning and development infrastructure and reimagine that, to Dr. Farndale's point, but also think through the equity piece, to Michael's point as well, is that if we're moving to a more digitally centered education, we have to have equitable access to the hardware and the broadband necessary to be connected. So, you know, broadband access is really the new, I think, utility that all citizens should have access to, because it's so innately connected to the type of access to education and the increase of quality of life necessary to, you know, thrive in the 21st century economy. I think the other thing around public-private partnership is the workforce development boards are a tremendous asset, especially when you think about the on-the-job training dollars that workforce development agencies can give employers, and that will be beneficial to the people that we aim to serve, because now employers have resources and a plan that they are held accountable to developing the type of skills they need across their workforce in order to move their company forward and be more competitive. So those are just a couple of examples of the assets I think the public sector has to bring to bear to ensure that, one, the recovery is equitable, but also that the recovery is an opportunity to reimagine how to develop the talent necessary to be competitive moving forward.
Yeah, and that's coming up in the chat as well, that, you know, in order to have this economic empowerment, in order to meet employers' needs, Leaders Up and other folks that work in this space, you need to make sure that the folks are ready for the jobs of the future. The future's got a lot quicker and a lot closer. But Michael, as you think about public-private partnerships and your work with employers, you must think about this all the time, every day.
Oh, you said it, all the time, every day. And a great example of that is, county, our board adopted an economic vitality plan for our first ever about 4 years ago. We set up a steering committee. And you just never know if that's going to fly or not, and what's people going to participate. But it really has. We have great partners on there with our community partners. Economic Development Collaborative, which helps connect businesses to resources.
Bruce Stensley. Sorry, I just needed to throw in a little Bruce Stensley plug there. Love that guy.
Well, I mean, it's just critical, right? And because they are just this great connector to our businesses, our community foundation, our education system. You see that our census program popped up out of that, with Vanessa Bechtel raising it at our Economic Vitality Steering Committee. That also created a complete count committee of over 200 different organizations. And so as I'm thinking about, what all the pain that we're going through with this pandemic, but the other thing that's happened, though, is that there's been more of this connectivity with our public and private partners and with the communities, really leveraging, for example, that complete count committee that we have to further reach out with business opportunities. Workforce development has never been more important, and really marrying the business needs to our educational systems and the county participating in terms of internships, apprenticeships, and so forth. Yes, this is just, it's an exciting time, and the pace is picking up. And I think that Dr. At the beginning, your keynote speaker referenced it. It just seems like the pace of these things is really accelerating.
Yeah. And okay, so the chat, your questions already, everybody wants to talk about broadband. Let's talk about broadband, right? You put together, like, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, but like in a lot of ways, we can't talk about anything until, and like literally a lot of people can't talk in these kinds of, environments because they don't have access to quality, affordable, reliable broadband. So maybe starting with you, Dr. Farndale, like, how are you seeing this in terms of the student experience, the sort of continuing learner experience, and what we need to do to make sure that we're meeting their needs?
Yeah, this is absolutely critical. And I mean, I can just talk at one level from my own experience of teaching a class last semester, and you can see how some students struggle just because they got a poor internet connection, not because they're not capable of handling the material or getting through the courses or anything. They're just disadvantaged by the Wi-Fi, you know, which is it's a crazy system that we end up in that kind of situation. It's one that absolutely does need to be addressed. But I think one thing is the technology and having, you know, that the broadband out and everybody having the access that they need. But we also have to think a lot about the quality of how we work or the education we deliver when we are in the online setting. It's not just do the same but through a camera. It is very, very different. From an education side, for a long time there have been online programs, but the quality in those online programs varies hugely. And anybody wanting to undertake some online education in some way, I suggest, you know, really check out the different programs because there's huge differences. But then thinking about some of the research that I do is around people working from home and the kind of challenges. And then we come back to where we started here with Mr. Wars talking about the equity issues. Because one person working from home or studying from home or whatever has a very, very different experience from another person, whether there's children around or whether just your actual space that you're working in isn't conducive to being able to focus, or barking dogs, you know, we've all heard all of that piece. You know, those being able to kind of manage people working from home or students studying from home, it requires a different kind of relationship that you build with individuals. But then also just people being able to be productive. One of the things that I've seen is people who were maybe not classed as a top performer previously are now being classed as top performers because something in the environment has changed that's made this individual be more productive because they don't have to sit for an hour and a half trying to get into the office on a morning, or, you know, so it changes the playing field.
See, I think that's so fascinating. Like that we just like have to rank people, right? And we think that it's, you know, this like inherent, you know, nature of them when so much of it can be like the environment. And, you know, I mean, I'll just say, my son isn't watching this and maybe he'll walk in, we'll see. But like, he was an absolutely sort of star performer in sort of in-person learning, really struggled with the online environment. And it took him, you know, the better part of a semester to even get his footing at all. And so we just need to be aware of how the environmental factors that people are dealing with, the human factors that people are dealing with, really have a gigantic impact on their performance, rather than it just being this like inherent nature of any person. I mean, Jeffrey, as you think about this, think about broadband access, think about access to jobs. What does this audience need to keep in mind?
Well, I think that broadband access or lack thereof has some tremendous implications on businesses' talent acquisition strategies, because a lot of companies now have really pivoted totally to, you know, digital recruitment, interviewing, etc., and even application processes. So I think the intersection between broadband access is also quality hardware access as well. Computing devices, when you look at low-income families and households with median incomes lower than $60,000, which is significantly lower than the median income in Ventura County, you see that majority of these households have one computing device, and the rest of the computing is done on cellular devices. So being able to ensure that there's infrastructure in place to get, whether that's public infrastructure or within home infrastructure around hardware and broadband, becomes a significant piece, because it is significantly pinching the pipeline that employers and businesses have access to diverse candidates. We've worked with a number of Fortune 500 companies over the last year to help them plug their talent acquisition strategy into a digital community like in the East Bay in Oakland or Richmond, California, and Compton, Watts, in the greater Los Angeles area, because these communities are significant, are living like in a black box, because broadband is so essential to connectivity in general, connectivity to education, as Dr. Farndale says, connectivity to our economy. There's a tremendous amount of goods and services now purchased via e-commerce as well, even connected to like civic participation and engagement. Without broadband, you're living in a black box. And to Dr. Farndale's point again, participating in digital education also builds competencies that transfer over into digital professionalism as well. I'm sure we've all recognized that there is another set of skills necessary to be a high functioning professional in a virtual working place as well, whether that's be utilizing technology and different platforms or just another level of emotional intelligence and executive function necessary to be effective. These are the types of implications that lack of access to broadband has on the talent base that we want to connect to, also the preparation of that talent base.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Michael, how are we gonna, it came up in the chat, right? I mean, we've thought of broadband as like a discretionary consumer product when it's really, an essential, like electricity or water. How are we gonna make sure that everybody has ubiquitous, affordable broadband in Ventura County?
Yeah, well said. And also, for our low-income communities and for our really critical businesses like advanced manufacturing, it just covers the spectrum. As you say, it's essential. So a couple things. Folks may know, or some may not, that there is a broadband consortium, and in partnership, of course, with EDC and our cities and the county and other folks. And so that assessment has been done. So we've mapped it out. And we can see what we have, and we can see what we don't have. And so one of the things that we're working on is to bridge those digital gaps. Particularly our cities now are working to develop infrastructure there. We have to connect, we have to provide that connection in between cities. And we're actually putting out an RFP in the next few weeks to help do that. We're also working on streamlining our permits processes as well as Dig Once policies. So that when utilities are going to put in lines, let's put in broadband and do it one time. And so
exactly.
There's a lot of exciting discussions happening there. The governor didn't put anything in his budget about it. I think it's something we need to advocate for because.
Yeah, absolutely. So working with the Broadband Consortium, working with others, California Forward, just to put in a small plug, has been working very closely with the administration, with the legislature. There are some great bills in the legislature, and the governor basically said, it's like but I actually would have liked to have seen, we have this huge windfall of one-time money in the budget. You got to spend one-time money on infrastructure, especially when it's essential to civil rights. So,
and the return would be huge. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
One last thing, if I may, Mike, I forgot to mention, you mentioned civil rights. Regarding diversity, the county, we just hired our first ever diversity, equity, inclusion officer, Pin Zapania. She started last Monday, just to let you know.
Great. All right. Well, my little paper that I've got says 11:19 is when we're supposed to wrap up. And I see 11:19 on my computer here. So, if you do nothing else as a moderator, I think you're supposed to wrap up on time. But we've done a lot more thanks to the panel. Really amazing leaders here. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing in your own communities from Pennsylvania to California. And I will turn it back over to the event staff.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Weinberg. And thank you to our panel for taking the time to discuss these topics. I think there's a lot of meaningful nuggets in the exchange of information for us to build on as we move forward in 2021. So thank you all so much for being here and taking the time. And thank you, Micah, for doing double duty today. We appreciate it. Okay. Now we have 3 more short questions we want to ask our audience today as we wrap our conference. This is just to kind of get a pulse on, where you feel like we are today, after the day today. We want to make sure that the content we provide you is meaningful and fruitful. So Nico, go ahead. Let's go to question 1. Did you learn anything new today? Everybody record their votes. Okay. Nico, are we ready to move on to the next question? Do you feel that you are now better equipped with the necessary knowledge on how to foster economic recovery in our region? Be sure and hit the submit button. Give folks a minute. Okay. Question 3. Do you feel that now you are now better equipped with the necessary knowledge on the future of work? Okay. I guess that's it. So thank you for answering these questions. These, your responses help us make the BOC better and better, so we really appreciate your participation and feedback. Positive or negative, we want to know how you feel and what you think, so thank you so much. So as we wrap up our conference today, I think I speak for all the organizers when I say we hope the platform and content of today's conference provided everyone food for thought, as well as a unique opportunity to reconnect with our colleagues. Because as I said when I opened the conference, it will take all of us working together to help our community recover and thrive. As most of you know, this is my final event for as chair of VCITA. I've learned so much during my 2-year tenure. I'm especially appreciative of the unwavering commitment of our executive committee and support of the board as we navigated these extraordinary times. Throughout its existence, VCITA's advocacy on behalf of our members has helped many navigate a sometimes daunting business climate. We are able to do that through membership and member involvement. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join by visiting our website. And if you're already a member, please get involved, and together we can raise the voice of the business community at a time when it's needed most. And with that sales pitch, I'm proud to introduce you to VCITA's new incoming board chair, who will offer some closing remarks to close out our conference. You've already seen and heard from Tracy quite a bit today, so I really appreciate her stepping up and taking over the chair position. I'm excited to see what the year brings. So Tracy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'd like to offer some closing remarks, but before I do that, there's somebody very important who's been with us this entire time, and I want to take a moment and acknowledge you, Michelle, for all the work that you've done. We are, especially with this very tough year that we've just been through, and we really appreciate and value all of your leadership during this tough time, helping the organization stay in the forefront and really being active and engaged in our community to make sure that VCITA is at the table and that we are addressing the needs of Ventura County employers alike. And so you will be receiving this gorgeous award. I will get it to you somehow, some way, but I just wanted to let you know that on behalf of the executive committee and the board members of VCITA, we want to say thank you for everything that you've done for VCITA in your term.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
And now to close out our conference, I also want to acknowledge all of our sponsors and all of our speakers today. When we thought about what our BOC should look like last year, our executive committee really felt that it was important to connect in this way. We in no way wanted to cancel this event because we couldn't be together in person like we normally are. And so I was very happy that we were able to make this happen. And I'm hoping that you all have learned today from our incredible speakers, maybe have taken away some ideas of how you personally, your organizations, can help and yourselves, and as well as maybe some call to action as a community. It's just incredible. Ventura County is an amazing place because at all levels we do come together as a community, and we collaborate for the betterment of our quality of life here. It's amazing. We all love the county and we want to be successful, and this is going to be a trying time as we all work together. So with that, once again, I want to thank our sponsors and for your generosity to help make this happen. I want to thank all of you in the audience for attending today. It's really important. It shows that you are invested in Ventura County as much as we are. Like Michelle said, if you're interested in becoming a member, please join our policy committee meetings. You can reach out to us at info@vacida.org. These sessions have been recorded today and they'll be distributed in the next week to all of our registered attendees. And as we mentioned earlier in the program, the platform is going to be open until 2 p.m. You can use that time to take advantage of some networking features and reconnect with one another. And with that, we hope to see you next year at our 51st annual conference. And I just want to wish everybody health and well-being, and just stay safe, everybody. And thank you for being here.